Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst, Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here as usual with Mr. Keith Myers, and we've got a special guest today. Dayna O'Gorman from Our Turf Football is going to be joining us in just a minute. But I wanted to check in with Keith really quick and find out how you're doing, because you've kind of disappeared on me online, and I've been texting you, and it sounds like you're just really busy, and you took a brief minute to take a time out and join us on the show again today. So just want to say
hi. I wouldn't miss the show, in part because we're 182 weeks into this without having missed a show.
There's a little bit of peer pressure on that, yeah.
There is. It's like one of those things where I now feel like no matter what's happening, you know, I could be getting my leg amputated, and I still got to get on here and record the show because we've been in it for this much. But no, actually, I've just been busy with the business, with the vet clinic going, and it's been crazy. And I'm sorry that I haven't been as responsive as I normally am on text and Twitter and whatnot. But I am here, and I am prepared, and I am ready for what I hope is going to be a very fun show.
Okay, so let's get to our guest, Dayna O'Gorman from Our Turf Football. Dayna comes to us as a third-time participant in our show, so we're just really thankful. One time she guest hosted with Keith in place of me, which I was very thankful for. And last year she came on, and we about the same time frame and talked Seahawk football. And she's the senior NFL reporter covering the NFC West and the AFC West. Dayna O'Gorman, tell me what's going on. Welcome to the show. Anything out there you want to promote currently that you're doing?
Well, thanks for having me back. I always have such a great time when I do this show because I can focus solely on the Seahawks. Now, I know we're going to talk about other things today, but it is a lot of fun when I can kind of narrow down my focus just a little bit. Yeah, so it's been a fun year for me between the NFC West and the AFC West. This last season, I was pretty busy over at Our Turf. But yeah, now we're just, you know, just like everyone else, trying to get in the groove of things, adjust to the new parameters that we as reporters have to live by. I can say I've never had so many emails from the Pro Football Writers Association before, because things change daily on what we're going to be able to do and not be able to do. It's just been crazy. And so nothing on the level of what the players have to deal with, but it's been interesting. But over at Our Turf, we decided that we were pretty sad for the Hall of Famers this year. It was supposed to be the big class. There's 20 people going in. It was a centennial. It was supposed to be huge, and everything got canceled. And so we are focusing in July and August on those Hall of Famers, trying to give them a little more love, since they're not going to get their ceremony this year. And so that's what we've been focusing on, of course, until training camp comes, where we will have new information to share about our teams, hopefully, depending.
Yeah, what's going to happen. No doubt. Awesome. Well, yeah, it's great to have you back. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be taking a big, broad look around the NFL, as well as the second half of the show. We're going to bring it back to the Seahawks, the NFC West, and the Seahawks. So we'll have plenty of time to get into all that. Just wanted to start off initially just going over a couple of different news items within the league that kind of tie into the Seahawks, tie into everything else we're doing. It sounds like Antonio Brown. I want to talk about this briefly only because it sounds like the Seahawks took a deep dive look, quote unquote, into Antonio Brown. And then Antonio Brown announces his retirement. So let me ask you this, Keith. Do those two things work together in concert, or are those completely independent things that are just a big coincidence?
I think they work together. I think what happened is the Seahawks took the deep dive looking in. I think they were the only team really interested. They had Russell Wilson pushing for this to happen, and the team goes, you know what? Nope, we're not interested. And I think that was the writing on the wall, that it might be in Antonio Brown's best interest to not have his name be floated around as this guy that is out of work, and out of work for the wrong reasons. Let him go take care of that stuff, and then he can unretire in a year or two and come back in and not have had all this stuff floating around about him the whole time. that he's been out.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Do you have a take on that, Dayna?
I think it's much the same. If he wasn't, let's be honest, the Seahawks are known for giving second chances. I mean, that's what they do, right? And so if the Seahawks took a long look at him and they said, no thanks, I can't imagine there would be another team out there unless one that was super desperate. So plus the loom of they have no idea what the NFL is going to do. I mean, are they still going to, suspend him, do whatever, they're going to do because, we're wondering what kind of footing Antonio Brown is on in his personal life because he keeps coming back and forth out of these settlements with these people. And so I think it's just a little too risky. We kind of...
Yeah, I would have an issue, I think, just personally. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. There's a lot of moral questions to the whole
it's just kind of icky. And do you want to start off an already questionable season with that on your plate also?
Now, you mentioned second chances. How about eighth chances? How about a guy like Josh Gordon,
bring him in.
7 suspensions, for different reasons, quite a few of just drug use, testing issues. And the Seahawks seem likely, at least the reporting I'm getting from like John Clayton and stuff, think that if he is reinstated, the Seahawks will attempt to bring him in. And I think that would probably end up being good. I know, Keith, you've talked about Josh Gordon kind of already being as part of the wide receiver group heading into the season almost, thinking that maybe this is already a done deal and it's just a matter of him being reinstated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that both the team has talked about it and just the way the reporting has been and the fact that he's been here in town, it does sound like if he's reinstated that he will be signing with Seattle very quickly. It also would make sense that he is going to get reinstated because the things that he has been suspended for 7 different times are no longer illegal with the new CBA. So I can't imagine them finding a reason to keep him away from the game. So
now, do you think he faces a suspension before he gets reinstated, or is it just, hey, we're going to start from scratch and you can play game 1?
I would expect them to just start from scratch game 1 because, again, they'd be suspending him for something that's no longer illegal. And I don't see them doing that.
Michael Bennett retires after 11 years in the NFL, 69.5 sacks, 3 Pro Bowls with the Seahawks, and a Super Bowl ring. I hate to see him go. It seems like it's kind of fitting, though, with the whole COVID-19 thing going on, and he hasn't been signed yet. I'm sure he's kind of kept himself in shape just in case, but probably a good time for him to kind of leave it there, leave his record intact for what he's already done, and to go out the way that he did. Any thoughts about Michael Bennett, Dayna?
I'm sad that Michael Bennett is leaving the league. He was kind of a pain in the butt. Let's just be honest. That's just who Michael Bennett was, but he was a fantastic football player and so fun to watch and dynamic. And when he left Seattle, I was sad because I knew that we would miss that on the field, that what he brought, and the fact that it came on the heels of Averill and Cam Chancellor. I mean, it was just so much at once, and that was sad. But watching him go into the other teams that he played with, you could just see that maybe the zip wasn't there, that the passion maybe wasn't there quite as much. And so I'm interested. It's been fascinating to watch what his brother has done post NFL. I think it's going to be just as fascinating to watch what Michael Bennett does post NFL. And so while I'm sad to see him go, because I think he did bring so much to football, it'll be interesting. I'm excited to see what's next.
Yeah, when he was signed along with Cliff Averill, for a combined $10 million or whatever a year, at the time, those 2 signings solidified that entire line and propelled that defense to really what it was. I mean, I thought those 2 guys in particular were the difference makers for that season and getting into the Super Bowl. And it's just interesting, the contrast between then and now. We're in a similar situation. We've got an open window for the Super Bowl, and it seems like all we've really been lacking is that defensive line presence that's at the next level to get the pressure, to get the sacks, etc. And it'll be, we'll get into the Seahawks discussion later, but it remains to be seen. There's a lot of hope, a lot of promise, on our defensive line, but not a lot of proven commodity after the starter level. And so that'll be really interesting. Speaking of Seahawks and just the NFL in general, training camp is coming up. There's been a lot of discussion in the last week, and I'm surprised they really didn't handle this earlier than just trying to cram it all in at this week about the coronavirus concerns, training camp. The rookies are supposed to report, all the players, by July 28th originally. They've still had key issues unresolved, the infectious disease emergency response plans, how many preseason games are we going to have, the frequency of testing. All the players kind of came together this weekend, including Russell Wilson. They kind of made a little publicity blitz on social media about player safety and all that stuff. I just wanted to get some thoughts, generally speaking, of how you guys think the NFL has handled this, as well as the Players Association and the players, about training camp and coming together and realistic expectations, and maybe a broader discussion about COVID-19 in general and how that might affect the league this year. Let's start with Dayna.
It's a little irritating, and we've been seeing this all over, social media, that this was the league that had the longest to prepare. They were the ones that had all of these months to figure it out, and they just kept waiting. Now, if you look at it from a business side, I understand why they did it. They were waiting to put this plan together because we didn't know what these months would bring. They also seem to be waiting to see how Major League Soccer and the NBA did it in their bubble scenario with their tournament, how that turned out, how much testing did they need to stay on top of it, that sort of thing. So I think they were taking in that information too. And of course, those MLS started a few weeks ago, NBA starts next week. And so I think that there had to be a little hesitation. And yet one would think they would have had something put together. And maybe they did. Maybe they have had this idea all along, and the NFLPA just wasn't having it. And it seems to be that it really came down to a couple of key issues with the preseason games and how often they were testing. And then the money, of course, always about the money and what happens if there's so much to it. I think it sounds like they're pretty close, if not almost basically done with their idea. And I keep saying idea of how this is going to work. Some teams have already got their rookies in. I know like the Chiefs have already got their rookies in today. And so that's why all of a sudden you see all these rookie signings, because they've actually managed to show up in their actual facilities. So I think that the plan and way they have it, it sounds good on paper. Whether that will translate over to, actually working and functioning. I think there was a release, I just read a little bit ago, that there were 98 players that had tested positive at some point. And so, where they're at with it, that's a large number. I mean, we have to keep that in mind, but we have to figure out how that's going to transfer over. Now, I know with MLS, because I am an MLS fan, I've been seeing on Instagram a bunch of the families, they get boxes of food from the team every single week. So I know the Colorado Rapids, they are sending the families these giant boxes of meals and food and everything. And I think it's to keep them from going out, having to go to the grocery store, so they can continue that bubble at home. So I always wonder to myself, what happens after training camp? What happens when those guys aren't in your control all the time anymore? I think that's going to be an interesting spin to it.
Yeah. Well, the NFL just came out and offered 0 preseason games, which the NFL Players Association accepted. They wanted that all along. I think the final pressure of all of those social media posts by all the players really kind of pushed that, got that done. Sounds like, the players who test positive will be placed on IR now, so they'll get paid. That's a 3-week thing. The frequency of the testing in the first 2 weeks is every day. And after that, if there's less than 5% positivity rate, that testing can step down a little bit, but that also coincides with the regular season getting closer as well. Interesting. Keith, any thoughts on, in general, like, are we going to make it? Like, is this plan a viable plan to get us to the regular season? And once the regular season starts, as Dayna said, when players are at home and things are, kind of almost back to normal, quote unquote, minus all the fans in the stands, I just don't think that that's probably in the cards. Do you see the season unfolding and making it to an end date?
I kind of do. But at this time, like, there's a lot that can still go wrong. As we said in our show where we just talked COVID the whole time, there's a lot that can go wrong here. It sounds like they've got a testing plan in place to get everybody in, everybody tested, and everybody tested daily for a while to make sure that we don't end up with these like an outbreak where it takes a team down or something, because as soon as someone tests positive, bam, they're in isolation and they're away from the team, and they can get it under control, and they have to they're out for 3 weeks on injured reserve, and that's instant, right? The teams don't have a choice on whether they put someone on injured reserve with a positive test. They just automatically get shelved, and so things like that, I think it can really help avoid this kind of like massive, well, guess what? Every member of the Saints just tested positive and now they can't play for a month. Or something like that. But at the same time, like, the players have to do their part. And they have to be willing to not go to the bars and, stay kind of within their own little bubble around the team and their family, and do the things that they need to do to make sure that they're not creating excess exposure for themselves and then their teammates and thus the league as a whole. And that a lot of the guys will do that, and there will always be a few that won't. And the question is the testing going to be, the turnaround time going to be quick enough that those that don't take it seriously enough that will, those of them, a few of them will get it. Can they get it? Can they stop it from infecting the rest of the league? I think the current plan sounds like they will, but it's, we'll see. I mean, I think it'll work, but there's no guarantee.
Let me ask you guys this. Is it an ethical question as to whether or not players and coaches and other associates around the teams get testing every day, and we expect those tests to be coming back within a reasonable amount of time, either instantaneously, like 15, 20 minute, 30 minute responses, or within 24 hours when, for example, I live in Arizona. It's really bad here. People that need or want to get a test sometimes struggle to find that. And then once they do, testing is not returning results for up to 7 to 10 days, which nullifies the contact tracing and anything else around that. So while I don't have the option of having quick testing and those results, is it ethical to have football players and coaches and stuff have that available to them?
No, I mean, yes and no. It's so hard. So what the NBA has done and MLS is they basically bought their own lab. They bought a lab. They do only testing for those people. And is it right to take up those resources? I mean, I guess yes and no. It depends on how you look at it, because they should be out there helping the community, and yet they're trying to keep people in jobs. And not just football players. We're talking about stadium workers and front office people and, not high up. I'm talking about the guy who stands at the guard door. You know what I mean? And so being able to do that testing quickly is important for them too. But at the same time, these are private labs. They're paying for this testing. This does not take away from the public labs that are out there for everyone. I want to piggyback on something, though, if that's okay, what Keith said. I want to talk about, the testing. And so they have a guy who tests positive. They put him on IR for 3 weeks. And if I remember what I read correctly, they said then at 3 weeks, they have to make a decision whether, taking them off or if they're going to play. Well, if you go back and read Von Miller's story, 3 weeks is not enough. Von Miller was sick, and he was sick for a month. And he said forever that he was still not at 100%. And so then you have to go and look at, is that enough time? Yes, it's past the 14 days, window that we were all talking about, but is it going to be enough for all players? And do they need just an extra week? Do they not? And so this puts a lot on the shoulders of the team to make those really tough decisions, because let's say Russell Wilson ends up with COVID. He has 3 weeks. He still has a bit of a cough, isn't feeling great. but he could play. Do you bring him back? Do you not bring, you know what I mean? Like there's so much more ethically and morally questionable about having a season at all than just the testing.
Well, that's, I think, why it made sense that everyone was talking about maybe expanding the rosters a little bit, because you could bring a guy off IR in week 4 and still not make him available during the game.
Fair.
Have him on the roster. So we'll see how that works out. This is not going to be a perfect thing as we go through the year. This thing's going to get messy and evolve, I think, probably over time. See how it goes. Let's talk about the football club in Washington, D.C. They announced
talk about ethics.
This is an interesting situation, because what has been going on with all of the protests and folks around the country taking a deeper look into how this affects the African American community and other minority communities in the country has put a lot of pressure on different people and organizations to change behavior. That's a good thing. And it so happens that it provoked a change to the formerly known Redskins club, Washington Redskins. They decided they would do an internal review on the name. And the result of that was that they announced they were going to do a name change, although they did not announce the name. I thought that was kind of screwed up, but beyond that, I'm good to see that is happening. So I want to talk about that as one issue. And then a separate issue is the fact that just this last week, 15 women, according to the Washington Post, have accused staffers, including director-level employees, of sexual harassment. And apparently owner Dan Schneider is not directly accused, but he may have fostered that culture. And, the team has hired an outside counsel, attorney Beth Wilkinson, to do an unbiased independent review. But that's an internal review. That's not like an external NFL review on this. And I wanted to follow up with you guys on that, how you think maybe that will turn out, if it's a good thing to have this sort of thing exposed. And I wanted to ask you specifically, Dayna, as a woman in this business, how this affects you as a person, and how you see this thing moving forward in time that creates a better atmosphere, a work atmosphere for you.
Well, I'd like to get back to the forcing the name change. I think and it was a force. Don't think Dan Snyder did that on his own. It was completely forced. Absolutely. He did not want to do it, and he was forced into it. So we'll get back to that. But for the sexual assault, there was a story that came out a couple of years ago about cheerleaders for that organization, and how when they were off doing their calendar shoot, that suite owners and business partners got to come along, and they got to, hang out with them while they were basically half naked doing this calendar shoot. And then afterwards, there was a handpicking of about 7 of them to come to a yacht party where they were required to flirt and do this and do that. So there's been a question mark about this league, or about this team, for a while. And that story was real big, and then it just kind of disappeared because the season started. Other people had stuff to talk about. So it wasn't overly surprising to me when this story came out of the Washington Post. Now, the magnitude of it, the number of people, surprised me. I'm not going to lie. But just because simply I didn't know that the Washington football team would have had that many female employees, to be quite honest with you, because they've had this reputation. But what it does is shine a light on what I call small incidences. These are not, no one was abused, physically abused, or anything that, usually gets the big numbers. These were little microaggressions that happen to these women every single day, all day. And they are very common in sports. But you've seen in other sports where they're starting to deal with that. They're starting to get a lot more women involved. They were a little more progressive. And the NFL was kind of the last bastion of the old boys club. And it got away with a lot because of the size and the popularity of the sport. And so people let, things like that go for a long time. And I think because where we are socially in our world right now, like you mentioned earlier, with Black Lives Matter and things like that came up, that not only did, force the name change also, I think that it's no longer going to be accepted. The hand will be forced to stop these things and call them out. But I will say this. Hiring a woman to be the internal person might look good on paper. It's going to take more than that. This is going to take the league. This is going to take, pressure from outside sources. It's not just going to be like, oh, we'll handle it internally. We promise, pat on the shoulder, and then it's going to go. But I can tell you this. I personally have met some amazing men doing the job that I do, and people who are men who are so excited to have more women in this league and reporting and working in the offices and that sort of thing. I have gotten some great feedback from people who are men who are just so happy that we're there. There is always one or two that stand out. And unfortunately, those bad apples, not even just in football, ruin it for everyone. But I can tell you that I think it's getting better, but it's going to be little pockets like this that'll have to be cleaned up.
Yeah. Well, and it's part of this, this is part of the process of cleaning it up. It happens with the team in Washington. You had mentioned that it's highly likely it's a more systemic issue. League-wise, is probably not the only team, although that particular team, that particular owner stand out above others. But it's probably occurring in multiple facilities and so forth, and in the industry in general. Women fight this battle. I know in the software industry where my wife resides, they have their own issues with regards to that, and the boys club and all that kind of stuff exists. There are certain situations, certain meetings that'll be in the dozens and dozens of people, and she might be the only woman in that meeting. So it's just one of those deals. I'm
going to jump in here, and I'm going to say something about this. The only surprise from this story was that Dan Snyder himself was not implicated.
I agree.
That literally was the only. That's the only surprise, because the idea that this happened in Washington is absolutely not surprising whatsoever, given that particular organization. And I know it was like, oh, well, he might have fostered a culture. He absolutely fostered a culture. This has been a repeated problem over and over and over again with that organization under that owner, and it never gets cleaned up. Why does it not get cleaned up? Because he doesn't care. He honestly doesn't care. He only cares about the public perception. He wants people to show up to watch stuff on game day, and as long as that wasn't in jeopardy, he didn't care.
It doesn't seem like this incident is enough for the league to come together to force an ownership change, for example, like what happened with the Clippers. I don't remember the guy's name, but that happened about 10 years ago at this point. I'm having a hard time seeing the NFL coming together, all 32 clubs voting to force an owner out or something like that. But can we affect change? Can there be enough pressure to make it so this doesn't happen again? I don't know. And you mentioned John Schneider being a guy that just doesn't care. I agree with you. And so what makes this any different long term? It's remain to be seen, I guess.
All that can be done is that, the silence has to be constantly broken. And that's going to come down to these people who are having these aggressions, put upon them. These women, they have to be vocal. And yes, women are constantly, as they said in the article, they're scared about losing their job. Well, lose your job. And then, you know what I mean? You just say, and that's easy for me to say sitting here. And it's very hard when you're in the situation, but women in football, women in sports isn't new anymore. And so now with more eyeballs being on that situation and more voices being heard, hopefully the threat of being outed will affect some change. For Dan Snyder, I don't think so. I really think that he just kind of thinks he lives above the world and can do what he wants. And he's going to be mad enough about having to change this football team's name. But I think, so I completely agree with Keith on that. But I do think now that the eyeballs are on it, and there'll be on every team, that will be helpful too.
So let's.
The one thing I could say is what might happen here is, he doesn't want to. He does not want to sell the team, and he's going to be kind of have to be forced, but he can get away with not having to sell his entire stake in the team. And what if he owns 60% of the team? Well, he's got minority owners that own, and that other 40% that are left. If he could drop his stake in the team down below that threshold, so that somebody else becomes the managing partner, the majority owner, then we could probably see a culture change, and he would still own 40% of that team and still making a bunch of money and all of that, but we could still see some change there, and that's kind of what I'm hoping for. I don't expect the league won't. The league has this apprehension of telling owners what to do with their team, and rightfully so. The instance what happened when Steve Ballmer bought the Clippers is just absolutely a unicorn, right? I mean, you've got an owner making all these racist statements and whatnot, and it was recorded, and that was untenable. Like, basically, you had that entire organization, all the players, and a very popular, well-known head coach in Doc Rivers, all say, "We're done. We're not going to play for this team. We're not going to work for this organization. Yes, we have contracts, but too bad. You're going to have one less team for all these games." When they came out and did that, the league had to step in, and it was in the best interest of the other 27 owners to step in and force that sale. We don't have that here. We don't have players refusing to play. We don't have an organization that's going to disappear if they don't do something. And that's why I don't foresee the league getting involved unless they're behind the scenes making this negotiation happen to get someone else the controlling interest.
Yeah, interesting. All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk about some fun stuff now. Interesting storylines to follow this year with regards to most improved teams. I wanted to just talk about your ideas on most improved teams. I have my own. I think Miami and Arizona are probably going to be in the top two of that conversation. But I wanted to kind of throw it back to you guys and see where you're at with teams that you think are most improved this year that can maybe, change the dynamic of their divisions. Either one of you guys.
Well, I do. I agree with Miami. I think that what we saw last year was, purposeful by Brian Flores. It was, cleaning out that locker room, putting in guys that he wanted. And yeah, they, were a terrible team last year. But he got exactly what he wanted, which was a blank slate and 1 million draft picks. And so I think that that's going to be a lot of fun to watch and see him take that really young team and see what he can do with it. So I'm excited for that. And then, of course, adding in Tua, that's kind of the wild card, but it'll be real fun to watch.
Yeah, he may not end up playing this year. In fact, it would be interesting to see if he did. But given the fact that it might be a redshirt year for them, to have him fall into their laps at 1-5 overall in the draft. Mm-hmm. And they had a great draft. If you take a look all the way through their draft, I mean, it was stellar. Mm-hmm. Plus adding Byron Jones at corner and a couple other folks. I just think that they've got a real chance to have quite a few win improvements this year from 3 or whatever they had 7. I think is totally doable with that roster. I mean, it's going to be young, like you said, but exciting for them going forward, no doubt.
Right.
Keith,
I think that'll be fun. Oh, can I say one more thing too? Yeah. I also am really excited to see what happens in Denver. So I'm
not going to talk to you about the AFC West. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not a huge quarterback fan, but I think Drew Lock, what we saw from him at the end of last year, I think that we could really kind of see a spark out of them. They had a fantastic draft. Are they going to compete? And we'll talk about this later. Compete with the Chiefs? No, I doubt it. I never say never because you never know what this but I doubt it. But at the same time, I think that they're one of those teams that's starting to kind of find some footing to kind of work its way up too. So, sorry.
Yeah. No, interesting. Yeah, Keith, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was actually going to bring up Denver. I think they're definitely in the running as one of the most improved teams this year. But I think one of the teams, if we're looking at just change in win total, the team that everyone seems to be forgetting about, I think, is Buffalo. And that roster is as good as you'll find in the NFL. It's like them and Kansas City and maybe San Francisco as far as roster top to bottom. The only question mark with Buffalo is their quarterback. And if Josh Allen makes any kind of step forward, any kind of improvement where he becomes a guy that could be, more than just a game manager and just a little bit better, like get up into the Kirk Cousins territory as in that like good enough to win, but maybe not good enough.
Well, good enough to win and carry their team with the defense that they have.
Yeah, like not good enough to carry a team, but good enough to win with. If you can get up into that stratosphere, that roster is as good as any you'll find, and I think that it comes down to him. And that's only to me that's one question mark. That's one piece. You answer one question with that roster, and you're seeing a massive win shift there. And I think that you look, that their division did get a little tougher. I think Miami got better and New England didn't drop off as far as we would have expected, but still you've still got a team that I actually would probably pick them to win that division.
That'll be interesting. Yeah, I mean Seattle faces Buffalo this year too, so we'll get a chance to see them.
And that is where Stephon Diggs landed, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
See, that's crazy huge because then, Allen he had weapons before, but holy cow, what a weapon. You know what I mean? So that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, top 10 wide receiver in my book for sure. Any other kind of, I like Arizona. So it's hard because they're going to be the media darling kind of club this year, along with Miami and maybe even Tampa. But I think Arizona is the dark horse pick for a lot of pundits in the AFC West, not maybe to win the division, but to be the wild card representative out of the division, and that Seattle would take a step back along with the Rams, and Arizona would ascend into that second spot with the 49ers. And if you really take a look at Arizona's roster, it's hard to argue with that theory as far as getting close. I think the key word is competitive with Arizona, with adding DeAndre Hopkins, Jordan Phillips, defensive tackle, a couple of linebackers, and their 2 or 3 of their draft picks are expected to start, plus their second year of their dynamic quarterback in Kyler Murray. It's a team to watch. It's an interesting team for me, just because the Seahawks have to face them twice a year, and I do think that they're probably a year away, but they're going to make some noise this year, maybe win a game or two that nobody expected them to win.
I don't know that I completely agree with you, although it wouldn't, when we talk about, I know we're going to talk later about, good divisions. With the new playoff format, the NFC West could easily have 3 playoff teams. It wouldn't surprise me in the least. And they could be one between them and the Rams. It depends on what's going to happen with the Rams. But I think that they have a lot more holes still that they have to fill. That offensive line was a disaster last year. And that's why, and I love Kyler Murray, but he was scrambling for his life back there. But I do think that his play will improve. We traditionally see that in the next year. So we'll see that. But I don't know. I think that there's still a lot of question marks on that team. But adding Hopkins, of course, was huge for them.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think they went about improving the offense. Anytime you get a chance to get a guy like Hopkins, you do it, because he's probably the best receiver in the NFL right now. At least he would be on the top of my list if I was ranking them. So yeah, you have a chance to get that guy, you go get him. But if I was running that organization, I would have said, we've got pieces that we can work with there. We have got to protect our franchise quarterback, because he looked really good despite having no blocking. This is very much a Russell Wilson situation where, like, Wilson looks amazing, and despite the fact he plays behind one of the worst offensive lines in football. Guess what? Well, Arizona's taking exactly the same approach to building an offense. They've got a great quarterback who looked really good despite playing against in front of or behind one of the worst offensive lines in football. And I think it would have translated to more efficiency had they just gone out and spent some money and got guys that they could count on to give Kyler Murray some protection. I think that would have been a better use of their money, a better use of their cap space, and would have definitely given them a clearer path to winning. I still have a hard time seeing them string together wins because they're going to get their quarterback killed.
And they play in a really difficult division.
Oh, for sure.
Yep.
So let's talk about division. Okay, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I don't know what their run game situation is. I mean, that would be probably the best thing that they could do for Kyler is go out and help there too. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, well, I mean, then they drafted, Benjamin too, who I really liked in the draft as well, to come in and help them a little bit with that. Let's talk about the divisions a little bit, and let's talk about Kansas City. Kansas City made it to the Super Bowl last year. They have re-signed Chris Jones to a 4-year extension. They re-signed Patrick Mahomes to a 10-year, $450 million. Oh my goodness, extension through 2031. What? They had a good draft. They drafted a running back that's maybe a little better than I think is advertised. They had a couple of different draft picks throughout their board that I thought could come in right away and contribute, especially on special teams. They didn't really have any major losses this last year. Can they get back to the Super Bowl, and can they win it? And how strong is the AFC West this year, Dayna?
They can get back to the Super Bowl. They can win it. I don't know that they will. I think that they can. They're without question in my mind right now the strongest team in the AFC. I think that, of course, we always say that at the beginning of the season, everything looks shiny on paper, but one injury can completely derail a team. One COVID positive player. I mean, it could be it's chaos this year. So it's a little hard to talk about, but I think about a couple of things with the AFC West, especially with the Chiefs. The contract, it's going to be fantastic for them for about 3 or 4 years. And
yeah, we talked about that last week.
Yeah, it's going to change. I've told, living here in Kansas City, I've told many of my friends who are Chiefs fans, I'm like, get used to life without Travis Kelce and probably Tyreek Hill, because that's going to have to happen in order to start making these adjustments. And in a few years, Travis Kelce only, I think, has this and next year on his contract. So we'll see. He's going to want some money. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that what they have right now for a team, super strong and fantastic. The rest of that division, though, there are quite a few question marks. I do think that we'll see an improvement from Denver. I do think that we're going to see, you never know. They might even pull off one win out of the two with the Chiefs, usually in Denver. That Mile High will get it. But I don't know for sure. Like I said, we have to see it all come together. But I think the additions that they made are going to make them a much stronger team.
Do you think they have a chance to finish second in the division?
I do. And that's because I think that there's a little bit more of a game plan there than I'm seeing necessarily out of the Raiders or the Chargers. I think that both those teams are in flux. And I always say the worst long-term contract I've ever seen is the one John Gruden got as a coach, because I don't think that that's working. It's true, because I just don't think that that's working. I don't think that, as we've seen with the Mac trade and all of that, there's always some antagonism going on when it comes to John Gruden, and either players love him or hate him. And so I think it's taking a lot longer to shake that out than they ever thought it actually would. I think the situation they put themselves in quarterback wise is also terrible, because you have Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota.
Yeah.
But we all know Gruden was real high on Marcus Mariota when he was coming out. We all watched those, the quarterback camps. We watched all of that. And so where are you going to go from there? How do you make that decision? It's not going to be quarterback by committee. You say, oh no, it's Derek's job. Is it really? You just brought in one of your favorite quarterbacks. So we'll see how that goes. But they had some great young players last year. So it's going to be interesting to see them.
Especially their defense is really starting to come around.
I think so too. So that, which you have to in that division, you have to be able to at least slow down Patrick Mahomes enough that your quarterback can try and keep up. Really, that's what it comes down to. And the Chargers, I'm so baffled by them. I think probably the best thing they did was get rid of Phillip Rivers, and no disrespect to Phillip Rivers, but I think that they were stuck in a rut with him, and they needed to shake that up, let him go, and he'll do just fine in Indianapolis and start new. Now, is Tyrod Taylor that person? No. But Justin Herbert, and I will say that a couple of the people I know who really watch college quarterbacks really like this kid.
Yeah, I do too.
And,
I do.
Yeah. And so I think that that's going to be interesting to see if the same thing that happened to Tyrod in with the Browns is going to happen again. I think it probably will.
I think I agree with you.
Yeah. But I think that you just never know how that team's going to come together. So I think the Chiefs, without injury or whatever, I think they have a lock on that division. But then I think it really comes down to the Broncos and the Raiders, and I think the Broncos might end up with the edge there. But I will say this, and this goes for Seahawks fans too, how weird will Arrowhead be empty? That is one of the good things, that one of the things that team thrives on is the fan noise, much like Seahawks fans understand that we need that fan noise and to help them. And so I think that is one, obviously they're going to lose that, even if they let 25 to 30% of fans in. It's going to be nothing. And so I think that that'll be interesting to see how other teams do without that fan noise. That's going to be one of the storylines to watch.
There's going to be so many asterisks on this year. I mean, let's just face it. It's just going to be one of those years where you're just going to have to say, if your team wins it, you're the only one that's really happy. And everyone else is going to be going like, well, we had this, we had to deal with this. Yeah, exactly. Keith, any further thoughts? And we'll kind of turn our attention to the Seahawks.
I think that division is really interesting. But I think the NFC West might be more interesting because we've already talked about Arizona, and we know I think Dayna and I agree that they're not quite ready, but they're close, and they've got that dynamic quarterback that everybody wishes they had. And the 49ers aren't going anywhere because that roster's stacked. Yeah. And the Seahawks aren't going anywhere barring a Russell Wilson injury, because even like last year when the roster was okay, he willed them to 11 wins and made them a contender. And this year I think the roster is better, and he's going to will them to as many wins as he can. That's what happens when you have one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And those three teams there are really interesting and could definitely see three playoff teams, especially with the new format where only one team gets a bye and an extra team gets in. Yeah, definitely. And then you have the Rams, who I think have taken as big a step back as you'll see. We talked earlier about who might be the most improved team. The most unimproved team in the league, the Rams would fall into that category.
I agree.
Yeah.
And so in the sense they're going to be interesting, but in an entirely different way.
Yeah, I mean, the Rams re-signed Michael Brockers and Andrew Whitworth, and that was it. And Whitworth's 40-something years old.
Yeah.
They lost Gurley, they lost Clay Matthews, they lost Dante Fowler, they lost Roby Coleman at.
There's something going on with that organization, don't you think? I think with the Clay Matthews and Marcus Peters suing them because they didn't get paychecks that they were owed, and there was like all kinds of weird organizational things that were going on with the Rams last year. I think that there's something going on there that we don't know about. And, it can be front office and here's the team, but it always trickles down. That kind of, discontent always kind of trickles down. I think, and from what I've read from a couple of the Rams fans that I follow and a couple of the reporters, maybe there's an issue of the Jared Goff question. how long do we keep going with this, and that sort of thing. And so maybe there's some tension there. But I agree. I think
they're going to go for a long time because
I know they have
get
to.
Out of his contract.
They can't, exactly. And so that makes me, feel like that this team is unsettled. We could really be proven wrong. I mean, they have a talent on that team, but I just feel like it's disheveled, for lack of a better word, right now. And so if you look at the way the organizations of the other teams, I think the NFC West is a better division than the AFC West. And that's no knock on the Chiefs. It's just because the depth isn't there. But of the 4 teams in the NFC West, I think the Rams are there. I think they're a big question mark. I don't know what's going on there.
Well, I mean, they traded away, and I can't remember the name of the receiver that they had, Brandon Cooks, and they took a cap hit to trade him away. Like he's costing more on the cap in dead money this year than it would have had he stayed on the team and played. And this was their best receiver last year. To me, that just screams we're rebuilding and we don't care.
Right.
Because we're like, we have this really good player. We're going to trade him. Care that we're taking this cap hit.
Yeah, get him off the books.
Try get him off the books so that a year from now we can get out from underneath some of this. Same thing when they let Gurley go, and now they got his big contract coming off the books a year from now, and I don't see them as really trying. And the one question mark I have with that team going forward is, who is Jared Goff? Because he's been in the league now for 4 years. He's had 2 really bad years, 1 really good year, and then 1 pretty dang mediocre year. So which one of those is he? Rams fans will tell you it was the 1 really good year. And most Seahawks fans will tell you it's the 2 really bad years. And I think the answer is probably the 1 mediocre year that we saw, because that's in the middle. And honestly, they're paying $35 million a year to a mediocre player,
right?
And that's gonna crush you. See,
yes,
the Seahawks are paying $35 million. The Seahawks are paying $35 million a year for their quarterback too, but they got one of the best players in the NFL for that money, who wills them to victories that they probably don't deserve to win. The Rams.
Jared Goff can't carry that team.
No.
Russell Wilson can carry the team. Jared Goff can't. I will tell you, I have this series I do over at Our Turf. It's called Fan Forum, and I have 6 fans from all over the league, and one of them is a Rams fan. And he sent me a message. He goes, "Thank God." This was after Patrick Mahomes got his contract. He's like, "Thank God people will stop talking about Jared Goff's contract." Now I'm like, no, they won't. They're still going to talk about it because they are stuck, like you said, with it, and with a player that probably hasn't earned it.
Yeah, when he signed that, when the Rams offered him that, they were kind of stuck in a sense because he had performed okay up until that point, and they needed to retain him because they were a Super Bowl team. They felt like they couldn't make that change at the top at that point, and so they paid him. And just ugh. So, how about the Seahawks? Let's talk Seahawks football. I mean, that's kind of why we're here, right? So the Seahawks. Speaking of roster, so let's talk about the roster a little bit. Let's the losses, and then let's talk about the additions. And then you said, I think the Seahawks have a better roster this year. Let's find out. So they technically didn't lose Jadeveon Clowney yet. He hasn't signed, but he's off the roster. Ziggy Ansah's gone. Justin Britt, Quentin Jefferson, Al Woods, Jermaine Ifedi. Those are the big guys that left. They added Carlos Hyde, Greg Olson, BJ Finney, Cedric Abuye, Brandon Shell, Quentin Dunbar, Philip Dorsett, Chance Warmack, Benson Mayoa, Bruce Irvin, Lyndon Stevens likely competes for the slot corner spot, plus all their draft picks. Jordan Brooks, Darrell Taylor, Damian Lewis, Colby Parkinson, DJ Dallas, Alton Robinson, etc. So with that said, you take a look at that. How did the Seahawks stack up with everyone else? It seems like inside this room, we're all very positive about that. Outside this room, other than, hardcore Seahawks fans, the Seahawks are diminishing. The roster's getting older. It's not as good. The offensive line is bad. The defensive line, Pro Football Focus, just ranked it dead last in the NFL. Which is it? Is it an improved roster or do you agree with those guys? Anybody?
I think people who listen to the show know my take on it. I think it's an improved roster. They're better at wide receiver. They're just as deep, probably deeper at running back, because with Hyde there, DJ Dallas, and they'll get Penny back at some point. The wide receiver group, especially with Metcalf now going into his second year, is very good. The secondary will be better because you've got Diggs for the whole year rather than 6 games. I'm going to count on Dunbar playing when I say this, because I think that's a big improvement. We don't know if he's going to be able to play and all that. Like we can debate that. It's a different topic. They have a lot more depth and speed at linebacker with Brooks. And the defensive line, I mean, you're talking, okay, they lost Ziggy Ansah. That's a name, but they got 0 production out of him. He is probably the easiest player to replace. The defensive tackles are the same. It really, they lost Clowney. The other changes up for that. And I think when you added 4 different guys to replace the pass rush of Clowney, that spreads it out a little bit. It takes pressure off people. You don't have one guy getting double teamed on every play, and the other guys still can't help. Can attack from different angles and all that kind of stuff. I see it as an improvement. And the offensive line, while it's unproven, let's wait and see. I mean, last year was just straight up bad. So I think that it won't get worse. I mean, it literally won't. It's not going to get worse than Fetty and Joey Hunt. That's just not going to happen. And so you're looking at it at an offensive line that should be improved just on the fact that it exists, and potentially be much better. It's a pass-blocking offensive line for the first time in Russell Wilson's career, because both Shell and Finney are well-known for being better pass rushers or pass blockers than run blockers. So you've got a situation where Wilson should have better protection, more time. Even if the overall quality is roughly the same, it's better in the right way, in that it's going to be a better pass blocking one. It's going to be better for the team efficiency. I see this as an improved roster because they lost one player that was really a player and a playmaker and someone that mattered, and that is Clowney on the line. Everyone else they lost is replaceable. I mean, just straight up. The only other one would have been the defensive tackle, the backup.
Quentin Jefferson.
Yeah.
No.
Al Woods.
Al Woods.
I did like Al Woods too. Yeah, he was good.
Quentin Jefferson was really good in 2 games, and he put up a lot of stats in those 2 games. The rest of the time, he's kind of forgettable. But he did play really well in those 2 games. And I think that, he's replaceable. I mean, you can replace those stats. You can replace that contribution. Al Woods is a problem because they didn't replace that. And they need someone to be that third defensive tackle in that rotation, and they don't have that right now. So that, to me, is the concern. It's Clowney and Woods. They replaced Clowney with 4 people, and they just need to find someone that can come in and replace Woods' snaps. And I think this is a improved roster overall.
And John Clayton does expect the Seahawks to sign a defensive tackle in the next couple of weeks, so we'll see. Dayna, what is your thought on the overall roster, what they did in free agency and what they did in the draft to improve?
Well, here I look at it this way. I still haven't written Clowney off. I don't know that
Really?
Clowney won't just get into camp and be like, all right, well, screw it. The best deal I got was out of Seattle. I'm already here. I might as well stay. I don't know that will happen, but I haven't really written it off yet. But I think you're right. They will end up signing a tackle. They have to at some point. And I don't know if it's just because I think, again, it's such a weird year. They can't bring guys in for physicals. We don't know. They can't really talk to them other than by Zoom. And so, I think that has put kind of the brakes on a lot of this. I was sad to see Quentin Jefferson go. I thought that he did play well. And yeah, he had 2 really good games, but I just thought he was solid. Is he replaceable? Probably he is. But I just thought that he really played well in the system. I liked him. I'm a Bruce Irvin fan. And I know people aren't big fans of getting the band back together. But I think that was probably one of the smarter things that Seattle did. I think last year he had 9 sacks, which was more than any player on our team had. And so I think that is good. He already knows the system. He's so damn excited to be back in Seattle. I think that energy is really good. I mean, I don't know if you guys follow him on Twitter, but he's jacked. He's so excited. So I think that energy will be good. Even if we only get half production out of him, that's still 4.5 sacks. I'll take it. You know what I mean? So I think that'll be good. I was really excited about Dunbar. That was the one I was really excited about. I thought he was a good pickup. I was excited about Dorsett too. We'll see how that turns out. But I was really excited about Dunbar. I don't think he's going to play this year. And that breaks my heart a little bit, not because of the situation he's in, that's his deal, but just because I would think he was going to be such a good piece for Seattle.
I actually do think he's going to play.
Do you? That would make me happy. I'm not going to lie. I know that's probably not an ethical thing to say, but it would be all right with me.
It's okay to root for your own team to have the players that you want them to have. I think he'll play only because I think the legal system is kind of screwed up right now.
Dragging its feet, maybe.
In Miami, they haven't prosecuted a case since March. Things are really getting pushed out there. Right. Things are up in the air so much so that he's already gotten permission from the district attorney to travel to Seattle for work. And I don't see anything really changing other than the fact that the prosecution could press formal charges.
Sure.
At that point, when you have formal charges against you, the league could put you on the you can't play list,
the non-available list. Yeah,
exactly. And so that could disrupt the whole thing. But other than that, I see him starting training camp.
I would be totally good with that. I'd be all right with that. Now, when we talk about the rookies, I will tell you the draft class. I think there's been a lot of people talking about the 5th round pick, Alton Robinson. I think people are excited to see him. And there's a lot of people who think that he's going to end up a starter. And so we'll see that. He'll compete right away. I will tell you that I have a couple of friends who know the Miami football team really well. And when we did, it was DJ Dallas out of Miami, the running back, they were like, you got a bruiser. This kid is good. And so that kind of made me excited about that. God knows we could use as many running backs as we can get as quickly as as Seattle loses them. I think that'll be good. I'm excited to have Chris Carson back. I think that'll be great. Penny would be good to come back too. But I guess this kid is pretty solid. And even if he ends up, on special teams or whatever, it'll be fun to watch him play. But Robinson is the one everyone seems to be really jacked about.
His tape is crazy good. I mean, his first step will remind you of Michael Bennett's first step. I mean, the guy he lives in the backfield. He's super disruptive. The problems with him, the reason why he dropped to the 5th round had nothing to do with his football skills. And that right there it's scary in its own right? And this is a guy that has some off the field stuff and some maturity issues and some other off the field stuff. And we don't know, how volatile that situation ends up being, but his football skills. Now, if he was being drilled and none of that other stuff, he would have been drafted much, much higher than the 5th round. He's got the measurables and the testing numbers and so forth to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick. There's no question. In 2018, he had 39 tackles, 10 sacks, 17 tackles for loss, and 3 forced fumbles. That outperformed his 2019 stats, but it isn't just about stats. It's about effectiveness, the way you are used, little injuries and dings that kind of get to you throughout the season. So he's definitely one to watch. I mean, exciting, a guy that can really have a lot of speed, quick twitch. He's known for his burst, just like Darrell Taylor. I mean, those guys are going to be quite a little tandem in a rotation for years to come, I think. Benson Mayoa may get the initial snaps out of the gate this year, but those guys are going to be right behind him, pushing every single week to get playing time, and will get playing time, I believe, in this defense. Only because last year we were ranked 27th against the run, 27th, rushing the passer, all that kind of crap, right? And guys like Taylor and Robinson just weren't available on the roster. I mean, we had Rasheem Green, plays a completely different style, different position, etc. Ansa just wasn't getting it done, and we didn't have anything behind Ansa last year
to help us with the pass rush. And now we've got Mayoa and the two rookies at that spot to really be able to affect the passer. I see a combined sack total of those guys at least 10, maybe even 12. All three of those guys combined, which would greatly improve the overall pass rush ability of the defense.
Well, yeah, compare that with those three guys to what they had last year, which was Ansa and then Shaquem Griffin, the undersized linebacker who they had come up and play defensive end in passing situations because Ansa was so ineffective. I mean, that's who they had. Those were the options as far as a pass rusher goes on that side of the line. They got nothing out of that. Other than, I mean, Griffin had some decent pressures, but even that, his pressure success rate wasn't that high.
Well, he got washed out just as often.
Yeah, and he didn't convert them into actual sacks. So he got a lot of pressure, but didn't convert them into sacks. And to have these three guys, I think all of which are better than the two guys they had last year. That to me is a serious upgrade where it needed to be upgraded. That side of the line was the weakest link on the defense, not named Tedrick Thompson, right?
And Taylor, the slot corner guy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Jamar Taylor, but there were serious holes last year. Jamar Taylor was one, Tedrick Thompson was one, and the Ansa side of the defensive line was one. Those were the three big problems on the thing.
Right.
We fixed the free safety problem with Diggs. They hopefully have fixed the slot corner problem with Ugo Amadi, and hopefully they fixed the defensive line issue with three different guys that can all play. So to me, I think you look at the defense, and that's where they needed to improve the most, and I see improvement.
So Dayna, let me ask you this. Let's stay on the defensive side of the ball, and let's talk about linebackers really quick, because I'm glad you're here. I got somebody else to talk to other than Keith. Love you, Keith. But I want a second opinion here. Let's talk what we've got and what we added. Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright. Those guys have been awesome. KJ's been underrated for a while. I struggled with injuries for a couple years. Came back last year, had a really kind of nice, solid season. And Kendricks moved on. He really struggled with tackling last year. But this year, and Cody Barton's sitting there as well. Then we drafted Jordan Brooks. Okay, so I want to know what you expect. The team says that Jordan Brooks is likely kind of a will linebacker, might take the place of KJ Wright, and that KJ Wright would, and this is right out of Pete Carroll's mouth, would move over to the strong side linebacker spot where Kendricks was last year and take some snaps there, as well as Irvin being there. Odd man out looks to be Cody Barton. Jordan Brooks looks to be the starter at will. How do you think that whole thing kind of comes together? And did you like the Jordan Brooks signing in the first round of the 2020 draft for the Seahawks?
I think that a lot of us assumed, or here's the thing, with the Seahawks draft, one can never assume. We've learned that over the years, right? So first of all, I was pretty happy we even had a first round pick because we often don't. But they often get rid of that. But I really thought that they would go pass rush. I really thought that or linemen. There were some good linemen left up there too. So they went with the kid, and I think he'll be good. I know that he had got a draft grade, everything from a B to an F. So for that grade. And so it always just comes down to opinion and how we think we'll do. Here's, I think, what it is in the linebacker situation. Bobby Wagner is still one of the, if not the best linebacker in the league. We know that. I don't think he's slowed down much, even though we're on year, 9 now, or 8, 9, whatever we're at with those guys, which is hard to believe. I remember when they were.
Yeah, as long as Bobby Wagner can stay clean, he can play.
He'll be great. We did see quite a drop-off when KJ Wright wasn't in the game. And so I think that brought a lot of attention, to KJ, because the minute he was back, they were better. And so when you say he's underrated, I completely agree with you there. I think that we don't see, but he does get injury. And I think this is the last year of the extension. I believe
Correct.
one more year. So that's going to be, so I think when they brought in Brooks, it's to see, can we live without KJ Wright? That's really what that draft was about, about that signing was about, is do we need to re-sign KJ? Is KJ at the end of his career and this kid can step in? So that's going to be something to watch this year. But what I think that Seattle has done beautifully with their linebackers is they have made them interchangeable for the most part. They move around the field very well, and I think that they'll just continue to do that. Cody Barton had some good moments last year. He popped a couple of times. Is he a star? Is he someone that fans will lament if he's gone? I don't think so. But I do think that he had his moments.
Solid.
Yeah, he's a good kid. You know what I mean, for lack of a better term. But at the same time, if they're expanding the rosters, maybe he ends up staying. We'll have to kind of see how that goes. But I think that truly the drafting Brooks was purely a KJ Wright move. I think that's what that was there for.
Out of the draft, what's your favorite pick?
I think I really like Robinson. I think you're right about that. I liked Dallas. Oh, who was the kid from the second round? I get their names next.
Well, they were Taylor, but
then
Taylor. Damian Lewis was the lineman in the third round.
In the third round. No, Taylor I think was pretty good too. Lewis seems to be really popular also, but I think I really liked Taylor. I think that one is a good signing too. But then again, I always say you got to do this. You got to go see who they picked in the 7th round because they always end up shining one way or another. So we got.
I was going to talk about Freddie Swain and Stephon Sullivan a little bit, right? So Stephon Sullivan, they came back into the draft and picked. They didn't have a 7th rounder. They came back and got him. And then Freddie Swain. Yesterday when I was kind of prepping for the show, I watched some more video on Freddie Swain, and I was like, I get it. I get why they picked Freddie Swain. Two things. He can develop into a really nice slot wide receiver for the team. He's very quick and sudden, and he can also get open down the field, down the seams as well. But the guy's an amazing return guy. I think that he's going to be put in a position this year to take over for Tyler Lockett in the return game as their primary kickoff returner and punt returner this year. It wouldn't surprise me. I understand that Amadi's going to get a shot there as well, but Freddie Swain's the guy that they're going to be looking at to take over that role. And he did very well in college. He had a couple returns in college where I was excited. I got excited watching him. He just made some moves that you just can't teach, and he'll be exciting to watch. Stephon Sullivan, I watched the LSU. What was it? I can't remember who LSU was playing now. It was a replay on ESPN over the weekend. And Stephon Sullivan had a couple of different catches and was used as a decoy quite a few different times. And he's a really big body. He's got a really nice physique. And if he switches to wide receiver, I can totally see that. He ran a 4.66 40 at 255 pounds or whatever it was. And if he can get down to 230, 235 and run in the 4.5 range, I think that's a really good opportunity for him to come in and maybe take a look at taking over for what's the wide receiver's name that's currently like 3rd, 4th wide receiver that has
David Moore?
Yeah, David Moore. Kind of take over that David Moore role.
I read about when the Seattle picked him up, one of the things I read in one of the draft wrap-ups was that he was going to be their project that had the most upside. And that if he was brought along properly, that he could really end up turning out to be kind of a steal for Seattle, but he's a project. He's got to be brought along properly first. And so that's exciting because, we need more of those weapons. Seattle needs more of those weapons for Russell and those bigger bodies. I always say Tyler Lockett's teeny. He we got to be careful with him. We need some more of the big guys to take over.
That's funny.
Well, at one point it was Richardson, Lockett, and Doug Baldwin were the 3 top receivers. And I'm like, this got to be the smallest wide receiver group in the NFL. And now, I mean, Baldwin retired and Richardson's on and still there, and he's incredibly productive. One of the most efficient receivers in the game. Now, look at what they've got for him. Josh Gordon is probably coming back at 6'3". Yep. You've got Metcalf at 6'4". You've got Swain at 6'4". Or sorry, it's not Swain, but Sullivan at 6'4". I mean, they're going after big bodies for Russell.
Yeah. Well, Philip Dorsett is 5'10" or whatever, but that's it. I think Freddie Swain's 6 foot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, John Ursua is a small guy too, right?
The big guys.
Yeah, John Ursua.
Yeah, he's like 3. Guy. He's like 3'4" or something like that. He's Tyler Lockett sized. I mean, he's an undersized guy, but they have gone out and made a point of getting Russ some big bodies too,
Keith, I got a question
especially in the red zone. Sure.
Out of all the additions this year, draft picks and free agents, who's the biggest difference maker that they've brought in this year?
That's tough.
That is a great question.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Here's the thing. It comes down to whether or not he plays, and it's going to be Quentin Dunbar. I think he has the potential to be the biggest difference maker. He could also not play because of his legal issues. And so therefore he doesn't make any difference whatsoever. And at that point, it becomes harder for me to figure that out.
Yeah. I'm gonna go totally underrated. I'm gonna and under the radar. I'm going to say Carlos Hyde.
BJ Finney.
Really? You should say BJ Finney, but I'm thinking Carlos Hyde. Wow. I think Carlos Hyde is damn near as good as Chris Carson. In this offense, with this line and the way that they want to run the football and make a statement, I think Carlos Hyde is underrated and could definitely come in and be everything that we thought Penny was going to be able to do and have just a really nice 1-2 punch with no drop-off. That to me is really important for this team.
Yeah. So one of the analysts came out with a new rating system, and it was for running backs, and it was anticipated yards or something. I can't even remember what it was, but they had a top 10 of basically what they're expecting these running backs to do this year and how they figured it out and blah, blah, blah.
Yards over expected.
Yes, something along that. Right. It just came out today. I was just reading it. In that top 10, Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde.
Yeah, Carson was 6. Hyde was 8.
Yeah.
In that.
If you look at yards after contact per attempt, Chris Carson is 3rd, Carlos Hyde is 4th.
That is fantastic.
Nobody's talking about Carlos Hyde, but I'm telling you, they get enough carries in this offense where he's going to make, I think, the largest impact on the team this year that we brought in.
I will say, again, if I had to throw in, it's not a new addition this year, but it was a new addition last year. I think having Diggs there for longer, I think that changes a lot.
You saw what happened. He was only for 6 games. He only played 6 games. But the difference between what that defense looked like with Diggs on the back end and what they looked like without him was huge. It was huge. And they were a good defensive team when Diggs was healthy and on the roster. And when he was before the trade and before he got when he wasn't on the field, the defense was pretty bad. And it's really hard to understate just it's hard to overstate just how much of an impact he can have, more so than look at Trey Flowers. When it was Tendrick Thompson back there, Flowers struggled. And the moment they made that switch and they got Diggs in there, Flowers started having good games again, like he did his rookie year.
Are you at all worried about Diggs being healthy?
A little, because this is a player that has had some injury issues. But I really liked what I saw from Marquise Blair last year. And I think that they've got a nice group of 3 safeties, all good enough to start. And whichever, if Diggs ends up hurt and they have Blair back there, I think they'll be okay. Ideally, you want Diggs back there. You want Blair up closer to the line of scrimmage and that kind of stuff. But I like their group of 3, their top 3 safeties. I think they're in good shape there.
Plus Amadi in a pinch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. So what's the best position group on the team as far as just overall talent, Dayna? What do you think?
Quarterback. So, was that the obvious answer? I'm sorry.
That's
There's Russell Wilson, and it doesn't matter who else is in the room.
It really does not matter who else. And honestly, you could do a lot worse at backup quarterback than Geno Smith, and you could do a lot worse at project third string quarterback than
Anthony Gordon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I actually like
Geno Smith there.
Yeah, I like Geno Smith there. I was real glad when he came back, and I think that because there's not that dread. It's like, oh God, if something should happen, even for one play, to Russell Wilson, who are you putting in there? Some 21-year-old kid who's never thrown in the NFL before? No. And so I like that. I like that there's a little experience. They have similar-ish styles. So I think that I feel comfortable there. And so when
does Seattle take the time to actually develop something?
At quarterback, when Russell Wilson's 42.
Well, I mean, you take a look at like the New England example, and you take a look at Tom Brady's backups over the years, and they've developed 2 or 3 different quarterbacks that they've got compensation for over the years. Seattle really hasn't taken that approach. Just wondering, curious if maybe they change that this year with Anthony Gordon, sticks around on the practice squad. They protect him a little bit so he doesn't get picked off. And they take some time with him over the next 2 or 3 years to kind of take over that second spot.
I think the expansion of the practice squad will lead them to that. There was a shift that happened in the league around 2010 where teams stopped carrying 3 quarterbacks and went to carrying 2. Mm-hmm. And in those instances, what you saw were teams not developing young quarterbacks anymore because they had their starter, they had their veteran backup in case the starter got hurt, and that's what contending teams did. And the teams that you get a high draft pick or whatever, and they're your starter, and then you have a veteran behind them, or you have a team that's just bad and they're going to go young at the position and see what we can find. But you didn't really have that. Okay, we've got a starter, and now we've got a young player that we're developing behind them. Because if you have a franchise quarterback and they get hurt, you want something behind you want something behind them that you can trust. You need that veteran to step in. And so when teams stopped carrying that third quarterback on the roster, you saw that late round developmental guy kind of disappear across the league.
They used that roster spot for something else instead. They saved that spot for another need. I do think that we're going to start to see a little bit more of that. Just as we're seeing less and less quarterbacks coming out of college hit right away. We're not seeing, we're also not letting them carry a clipboard, like you said, in 2010 for a year. They don't have the Aaron Rodgers luxury of having Favre in front of him for a while. And so I think that they're going to want to start to develop these kids. Plus, as these quarterbacks decide to play longer into their career, as they're not done at 35, they're done at 45. There's more likely an injury, more likely an issue. So then they're going to want that younger person there instead of just the veteran. And it's kind of too bad. So Lisa, who writes for the Miami Dolphins for us, she is a true believer. If you draft someone in the first round, they start. That's their job. You are a starter no matter what, especially in a quarterback. And we argue back and forth about whether or not those young kids need a year. And I always bring up Patrick Mahomes. He got to sit behind Alex Smith, who truly is one of the professionals of this league. I love Alex Smith. And so, he got to sit and learn and then come in. And I think that that's important. And I hope that they bring that back a little bit. I think it's very beneficial for the game in general.
Well, it's very beneficial for the player. I think it's been well documented that there's a lot of bad habits that can be learned by starting week 1 when you're still learning the protections and that kind of stuff. And then, and you also have to make the plays, just the speed of the game transition. And you can create a lot of bad habits by starting a quarterback too early. But your point on it being better for the game, it's better for the NFL. Because you end up with a higher quality of level of play by letting these guys develop properly.
I think that's why everyone was excited about the XFL. just being kind of
I really was.
a developmental league, if you will, as well as getting some, larger exposure on TV and stuff. It really was about developing talent. And I think the league would be best served, really well served for having a developmental league formally, where players can develop, have playing time, get experience, be able to come up or back down throughout a season or whatever. One final question before we wrap this thing up. Last couple of weeks on the show, Keith and I have done a breakout player on offense and defense, five each, 5 on defense, 5 on offense. One of those players on offense that we both had was wide receiver DK Metcalf. And he had a great rookie year, but we still expect him to break out even further. And I wanted to find out from you, Dayna, what you think of DK Metcalf. And last year we spent the whole year kind of tamping down our expectations of him so that we weren't putting extra pressure on him like we had anything to do with it. This year, though, the reins seem to be off, and it's going to be wide open for him. What do you think he does this year? I
was so impressed with what he did last year because, like you, I was like, well, we'll see. You heard the talk around the draft and blah, 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 and all the people and everything. And so I didn't have a lot of expectation. And then you saw him after a few games and you're like, every game he gets a little better. You could see it start to evolve. So by the end of the season, he was fantastic. I think he will become the premier wide receiver for Seattle. And I think this is the year he'll do it. As you guys well know, that, players make a huge jump from year 1 to year 2, just because they're more settled. And he seems super focused. I mean, he's kind of a goofy guy. I mean, if you watch like his Instagram and stuff, he's kind of a fun, goofy guy. But he was working out with Russell. He's, still in it, working out like crazy. And he has set a pretty high bar for himself. And I think that a lot of times for players is one of the most important things that they can do, is set their own bar. And he expects to be the best. And I love that. I think that big, huge receiver, I think what maybe they thought they were going to get out of Jimmy Graham, with a big body and the super tall or whatever and the fast, but he's so fast and that I think that now he understands the game. Not that he didn't understand football before, but they just understand the game at a different level that second year. I think he's just going to skyrocket. I am so excited. And I'm not an offense lover. I love defense. And so for me to get excited about an offensive player is kind of rare. So I think he's going to be fantastic.
Cool. I will say, when Bill's right. We spent most of the time being like, it's Seattle's a low volume offense. We're talking about a rookie. We're talking about a rookie who didn't have a lot of. He didn't have a lot of production in college. It's going to be slow. We were just saying keep your expectations low, and he blew our expectations away.
Well, and Pete Carroll in the preseason, in training camp, was glowing about this kid. And Pete Carroll never glows about a rookie, unless it's Bobby Wagner, or Russell Wilson or whatever. And it's like, if he's on that same level of expectation level for Pete Carroll, and he's saying it out loud in public for everyone to consume,
they actually can write it down.
Yeah. And so we're like, wait a minute, we can't believe Pete Carroll. He's just all being fluffy and Pete Carroll-ish, right? Mm-hmm. No, he wasn't. He was accurate. Very accurate.
I think that Metcalf made a lot of fans happy, and he created a lot of fans for himself. Even before he got on the field, when he showed up for that first thing in the locker room and press kind of thing that was going on, and he was wearing the old school Steve Largent jersey, and you saw that and you're like, this isn't this is just what he's wearing. It's not like a staged thing or whatnot. And you're like, this kid gets it. He just gets it. And
he bought it.
And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, I can't help it. I'm going to be a fan of this kid. And he did not disappoint. So I'm hoping I'm not setting myself up to be disappointed by having these really high expectations, but physically he is, right there with Hopkins and Julio Jones and AJ Green, and that kind of dominant player. That's where he is physically. He's only in his second year. We'll see what he does, but the talent is there.
Awesome. Yeah. Anything else?
Let me tell you, I'm going to tell you a funny story real quick.
Sure.
So I'm not someone who buys jerseys very often. And so the very, very, very first jersey I bought, well, that's not true. I had a Walter Jones jersey, but that was put away because he was not playing. He was retired. And then he was in the Hall. So, but then I bought a Richard Sherman jersey. And then he left. So to replace that, I got a Doug Baldwin jersey. And then he left. And so I did not buy another jersey until the last December. I got a 12th man jersey because I thought, that's it. They can't leave, right? And now we probably won't have fans in the stands. So I'm making a pledge that I will never buy another Seahawks jersey again. I will stick to T-shirts because apparently Dayna is a curse. So while I really want a Marshawn Lynch jersey because I think that him coming back last year was the highlight of the season for me. You have no idea how big of a fan I am of Marshawn Lynch. It was the highlight of the year for me. I'm not buying that jersey because I don't want anything to happen to him.
That's funny.
So I just want everyone to know I apologize for buying the 12th man jersey because now there are no fans in the stands. So I'm just saying.
So we can blame Dayna for COVID. It's all her fault.
It is all my fault.
And
it is. It's bad of me.
Well, I did go out and buy a Metcalf jersey, I have to admit. I'm not a huge jersey guy either. I only own 3 of them over all the years. But Metcalf to me is special, and he's going to be around for a while. He's going to be one of those core guys that you're going to keep on the team for at least 2 contracts. And so I went out and did the jersey thing for him because
my son did the same.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, let's wrap this thing up. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it, both Keith and I. It's always a pleasure to have you on. You're very insightful, and just to have another perspective and voice on the show, especially as we get closer to training camp. Everyone's kind of get excited, check in with all the other teams in the league and your focus on the AFC West and stuff. That was very interesting. So thank you for spending the time with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. You know I love coming on here. Anytime you guys want, I love it. So I appreciate it.
What are you doing next week?
I'm available.
We'll see.
All right.
You know, you're only the what is the Keith, the 3rd guest we've ever had on the show, really?
Yeah, we've had 3 guests on the show, and we've only had guests on the show 5. We've only had guests on the show 5 times, and you've been 3 of them.
Well, thanks, guys. That's
How about that? You get a special prize now.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So you can find Dayna on Twitter. Where can we find you on Twitter?
So it's at Dayna OG. It's Dayna OG. And then, of course, over at OurTurfFB.com, you can always find us there, too.
Nice. You can find Keith at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. SeahawksPlaybook.com has all of the shows, the podcast, and you can subscribe to the show there as well on any of your favorite podcast apps. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. The show is at Hawks Playbook. And you can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.